Welcome to the Learn Tarot with Moxxie podcast, where you can learn to read the tarot for yourself and for others. Here we look at the tarot from all angles, and I share the very best ways to use it to work through past trauma and create the life that you love. So join me. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Learn Tarot with Moxxie. It's Michelle here, and I am, as always, happy to be here, happy to be chatting with you about all things tarot. This week we're going to be talking about grief, and I have been putting this off just because I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but there is enough going on in the world that I think that it's time that we have a little conversation about it. And I have a spread for you about coping with and working through some of the grief that we're experiencing these days. Before we get started, though, I wanted to remind you that the court card course, the course that is designed to help you learn the court cards inside and out once and for all, is going to be published in March. So if that is something that you are interested in, keep an eye out or shoot me an email and I will put you on the wait list. And also, a reminder to you to send in your questions for a free reading. We've started a new free reading situation. And the new free reading situation is there is a link in the show notes to a form that you can fill out. And I ask for basic information. I think I ask for your birth date because that helps. I can take a look at numerology and astrology a little bit. But basically just like your first name and your question. And if I choose your question, I will be doing the reading and I will be sharing it online for everyone to use as a learning opportunity. Keeping in mind, of course, that we're talking 100% confidentiality. I will let the person whose question I chose know that it's coming out that week, but I certainly wouldn't tell anyone else. So it's kind of a nice way to number one, potentially get a free tarot reading. And number two, to use these readings as case studies and ways of looking at how someone reads the tarot. Maybe you want to learn to read the tarot the way I do it. Maybe you want to learn a little bit from me and then you're going to go off on your own. Maybe you have your own style completely. But watching or listening to someone else give a reading just opens up your options a little bit more and expands your horizons into what you might want to do for your own readings. Before we jump into that, though, I wanted to answer a tarot question that came through that is asking, why did you get into the tarot in the first place? I was interested in the tarot way back in college, but I really didn't take the time to learn the cards. I was much more interested in the tarot as a tool of divination, as a tool to help me figure out, basically silly things like if so-and-so thought I was cute, or, how this test was likely to go, that kind of stuff, right? It was very superficial. And I got busy, life happened, and I had my cards, put them in a box, and that was about it for 20 years, 25 years, maybe. So that would have been, let's say I was 20, 40, over 30 years they sat, okay? So for 30 years, my tarot cards literally moved from house to house with me, and they were always on a shelf somewhere, but I don't think I ever looked at them once. And in 2014, my mom passed suddenly. Difficult situation, lots of family stuff to deal with. And I was having a really, really hard time just coping. I was depressed. I was frustrated. I was a lot of things. I was grief stricken. Yeah. And so I can remember distinctly at one point sitting down, and it was around that time that I started meditating and doing yoga as well. And I can remember at one point sitting down just in tears and sort of throwing my hands up and saying, I give, uncle, please just somebody out there in the universe, help me out. Tell me what to do. I'm confused. I don't know what I'm doing. Life doesn't feel very good right now. And so that sort of began a process of me opening up a little bit to possibilities. And what I decided and what I told the universe is that any legitimate opportunity that was put in front of me, I would at least consider. And from that point on, things started to very, 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 very slowly open up for me a little bit. My intuition was popping. And there was a day I was literally dusting, and it was like a voice in my head, which sounds scary, but it said, you need to get your tarot cards back out. And I did. And I sat down, and they felt better this time. It felt more like I could come up with a way to use them in a way that might help me work through some of the stuff that I was trying to work through. And so that was the beginning of me getting into tarot this time, right? Me getting into tarot at this phase in my life and essentially turning it into what I do and sharing it with other people. And it's been a wonderful journey. It's been not an easy one, certainly, but it has been interesting and rewarding, and one that has been worthwhile. Okay, so that question answered. Let's move on and talk about grief. I don't need to tell you that life is hard. I don't need to remind you that even in the happiest of lives, there's going to be some grief and some sadness. It's just the way it is. Unfortunately, life doesn't always give us the best of circumstances. It gives us crappy, ongoing, ever-changing circumstances that these days are kind of hard to get away from. Maybe it is my imagination. Maybe I'm getting old. But I don't remember ever feeling like globally we were careening from crisis to crisis to crisis to crisis. And that's a reality now. And it's circumstances like this reality that are really hard to get away from. And I mean, sure, there have been times when my personal circumstances have sucked, where your personal circumstances have sucked, where, we lost someone we loved, or a relationship ended, or there was a war, or there was a global tragedy. I just don't remember it being so constant. I have basically lost track of mass shootings, which is tragic, right? Because I have become inured to the news. And as a defense mechanism, as the only way I can cope, I have to kind of harden my heart a little bit, or not pay attention to the news, or figure out a way to create some distance between some of these incredibly sad, grief promoting events and my space, and my own space, right? I need that mental health space. No one, well, that's not fair. If we find ourselves living in a space where it feels like We're constantly being barraged with grief. We need to figure out how to deal with that. I have lost track of which mass shooting is which. I have become inured to the news. It's just a big defense mechanism right now that goes up, and I have quit reading the articles. I mean, I pay attention to headlines so I understand what's going on, but that's how I deal with this, right? I deal with it by not dealing with it, which is inappropriate. Sit in a room with 500 people, and I would bet that you would struggle to find more than a handful of people who are not currently grieving somehow over something, whether it be something personal, a relationship, a loved one, a situation, or whether it is just, the global tenor and what's going on and the energy that is out there, right? From 40 some thousand people dying in an earthquake. It's pretty darn overwhelming. We all experience it. Some of us just deal with it differently, right? It is insidious. It hides from us. It's like, okay, I am going to be so busy that I can't think about anything, which is going to allow me to keep that grief at bay. Now, that's not really a very logical way to express it, but that's what a lot of people do. A lot of us do that. It's like, okay, well, if I just stay busy, I won't think about it. But it also can hide from us, in social media, scrolling and just checking out, drugs and alcohol, even things like religion or yoga or meditation, anything. It can hide if we are using these things that we would normally consider at least benign as tools for helping us avoid the grief that we need to be dealing with. We constantly look for distractions from our pain. And sometimes the best cure for that pain is facing it. The problem with grief is that, you can drug it, you can wear it out, you can feed it sugar so it goes crazy and it's too busy and dingy to think about anything. You can do tons of different things to keep that grief quiet, but eventually it is going to seep through. It's going to pop up, and usually it'll pop up at a time when it surprises the heck out of you. Sometimes it's going to be logical. You're looking through old photographs. You're telling a story about your grandmother. Logical things that are what I used to call, when my daughter was little, happy sad things, right? Things that you're so happy that there are tears of joy. Happiness, that telling that story where you just get that warm, fuzzy feeling about the person that you're talking about. And then, of course, you're happy, but you're sad at the same time, and you're crying a little bit, and it's warm, fuzzy, right? Maybe it will surface at that point. Hopefully, at that point, you would just let it come. But it might also blindside the hell out of you over something you normally never cry over, right? It might be somebody cuts you off in traffic, and all of a sudden that is it. You have had it. The world is against you. The world is an awful place to be, and that grief dam just bursts. Maybe there's an outburst in a work meeting. Maybe you finally lose your temper and tell off that colleague of yours, and doesn't go very well. I am an empath, and I have struggled my entire life just to feel my own feelings. And that's enough, right? I have plenty of my own. I don't need to feel everybody else's stuff. And over the years, I have learned to separate, at least sometimes, most of the time, what's mine from what is everybody else's. And I've learned that it's a necessity to do that so I can protect my own energy. when I say protect my own energy, I don't mean protect myself from getting sad because I deserve to be happy all the time. I mean protect my energy from the perspective of simply learn what is mine, learn what is someone else's, and when what I'm struggling with is someone else's, to gently and firmly give it back. And I'm not saying literally give it back to them, but give it back to the universe. Let go of it. Release it. Say, this is not mine. This is not my feeling. I might be feeling sad at this moment, but it's not my feeling. It is a feeling that is sort of seeping in from the ethers. And a lot of people are dealing with that right now. You know, everybody's life has been impacted by the last 6 years, let's just say. Some people's more than others. But even the people like me who have just kept working, I worked at home, things have just plugged along, I guess, life keeps moving. But even for me, as someone who has been able to separate myself from this, it's still constantly there. And if it's constantly there for me, and I have learned how to manage some of it, it has got to be there for other people exponentially, right? Because some people haven't learned to deal with their grief. Some people haven't learned that grief isn't just about someone dying. Grief can be about all kinds of things. So, now that I have uplifted you with my conversation on grief, I put together a spread that is designed to help us first acknowledge our grief, then to examine it, and lastly, and hopefully, release at least some of it. And because life is what it is, and we are constantly in states of grief and joy and everything in between, this is what I would call a maintenance reading, something that it would benefit you to do on a regular basis. Monthly, quarterly, whatever it is. But the reason that I suggest it is because there are times when we're struggling with something internally and we don't really fully allow ourselves to acknowledge it. And by doing this type of reading on a consistent basis, what will happen is it's going to allow you, number one, to get in better touch with your feelings. Number two, to get used to being in touch with your feelings, which for some people is really hard. To sit and feel the feels is difficult. Unless the feels are joy, happiness, ecstatic joy, that kind of thing. It also helps us deal with it, like on a maintenance basis, like your pool cleaner, right? Your pool person comes, they vacuum out the pool, they add whatever things, chemicals or whatever it is they need to add to the pool to keep it nice and balanced and crystal clear and blue and safe to swim in. That's kind of what I'm talking about. A maintenance reading that helps you keep your heart, your soul, your, what do I want to call it? Your solar plexus? Free from insidious things we don't realize are there that are really pretty darn damaging. These questions are mix and match, right? You can choose which ones you want. You can use all of them. You can use some of them. And those of you who know me know that I could care less in what position you spread out your cards. I will lay mine out usually just in a straight row. So in the show notes, I will give you the questions or the card prompts, but I'm not going to tell you how to lay them out. You can do that however feels right to you. All right. First and foremost, and this is something, this first question, that I would suggest you ask yourself. And if you are unable to really feel like you can get a clear answer from yourself, then go ahead and pull a card. But the question is, where is this feeling coming from? Is it really mine, or is my force field on the fritz? Helping you distinguish between those two things can make a really big difference in how we perceive our grief. If it really is your grief, then we need to look at it, right? If it is someone else's grief, this is your opportunity to recognize that and release it. Number 2, let's say you decide that you're going to continue on your reading. That you realize that this is your grief, it's something that you have to deal with, and you're ready to face it. So the question now is, what, if anything, can I do to change the situation that is causing me to feel this way at this time? Sometimes when we don't feel like we have any control, that can add anxiety to the feeling of grief, right? Then we get into this swirl of anxious anxiety, anxious grief, what's what, and our energy gets really, really tightly strung. So, is there anything that I can do to change the situation? Let's say you are grieving because someone passed. Well, no, there really isn't anything you can do to change that fact. What you can do, though, is you can pull a card and that you ask, what can I do to address this situation and help myself work through this grief? So if you're asking the question, what, if anything, can I do to change the situation causing this feeling at this time? And you're coming up with, no, damn it, I lost this person. They died. They are out of my life. I have no control over this. At least you recognize that, right? And there will be times when you do have some control. And if you find that you don't have control, then what you do have is your brilliant mind that can start to problem solve and help you figure out how to deal with this. And one way to do that is to ask yourself the third question, which is, where or how can I show myself more grace? How can I let myself be okay with myself being in this space of grief? You know, so often when we are dealing with grief, especially in the death of someone, what happens in my experience is we rally around the person who is left, the husband, the wife, the child, the whatever, the people that are still around. We rally around them and we support them and we do everything we can to help them for like 2 weeks. And then we have to get back to life and our lives get busy and we don't forget about that person. But we do, we just have to, we do take care of life, right? And so the point being, this isn't about how we are behaving, but about how other people have a tendency to experience this grace. And what you may find is that when that support starts to taper off, that it's going to be up to you to figure out how to show yourself some grace, how to give yourself that support, how to give yourself a break on the days when you just don't freaking want to get out of bed? How can you support yourself? How can you show yourself some grace? Side note, without turning it into a 6-month long cop out, but how can in the moment, or how can, for the next few weeks or few months or whatever it is you need, how can you do that? Because ultimately, your grief is your grief. And while everyone else around us can sympathize, some can empathize, empaths sometimes actually feel that grief, it's still yours. And so this is the beginning of the conversation about how to deal with it. The number 4 card, you also may want to ask how you can show more grace to others. Is there something that you can do? Maybe you're pissed off. Maybe whatever happened, whatever has led you to this grief has also left you bitter and angry and frustrated and blaming others. And so if that is the case, think about, and it's the hard one, right? It's a really hard one when someone hurts us to try to show them grace. But if we can work through our own pain to the point that we're actually able to genuinely offer them grace, then we win, right? We win that one. Not that they lose, but we win because we've been able to shift and manage how we're being in a way that we won't let them impact us so much. Number 5, real simple one, a card to support me through the next blank, whatever your increment is for this maintenance reading. A card to support me through the next week. Maybe you're right in the middle of a crisis and you're struggling. Card to support me through the next 24 hours. Or a card, this month, a quarter, however often you decide to do that, you can choose a card that can become your ally at that time, through that time period, and you can draw on the positive aspects of that card for support. Number 6, we're starting to move out of it now, right? How do I best survive and even thrive during this phase? What can I do to not only get through the next 6 months, what can I do to make it an amazing 6 months? Make it a 6 months that I use in a way that allows me to blossom. The 8th question is, where and how can I gain some closure? What can I do to help me bring this grief process to an end? That's a pretty simple one as well. This card is asking not how you can avoid the pain. This card is asking you how to work through the pain, how to conclude everything in a way that is healthy for you emotionally and all of those other things. Let's talk for a second about the grief that we cannot find. And in some ways, that's what I'm talking about when I talk about, what's going on globally in the world, where we might not have anything really challenging going on in our personal lives, but we may on occasion just feel ourselves feeling so sad and so overwhelmed and grief-stricken. And, if you are someone who deals with anxiety or depression, that type of thing, it can be overwhelming, right, to just be in the world right now. And it is beneficial for me to sit down and again, and this kind of goes back to this, is this really mine or is my force field on the fritz, right? it's a fact-finding question. And by identifying what it is that is creating this grief, we can deal with it a little bit better. Is it generalized grief because the world is difficult and scary right now? Is it specific grief because you have lost someone or are dealing with something in particular? Is it grief of a friend that you're dealing with? What kind of grief is this? And once you identify that grief, it's much easier then for you to figure out, is this mine or is this my force field going wonky? So yeah, I think I would probably say the first question is, where is this feeling coming from? And the second question is, what is causing this feeling? And then from there on, we go through the rest of the questions. I just want to close by saying that while I don't want to draw attention to difficulties, I do want to acknowledge that things are challenging right now. People will avoid, and I understand completely, but if you can nurture yourself and allow yourself to sit through, experience the grief that you are experiencing, to truly experience it, to let go and cry your eyes out, to sob, to throw something, to hit a pillow, to whatever it is, to release that. We can't get to that point. We can't release it if we don't acknowledge it. And we don't acknowledge it if we stay so busy. So I truly hope that you are in a phase of life right now that is joyful. But even if you are, keep this one in your back pocket, because inevitably life is life. It's a cycle. Remember that wheel of fortune where sometimes we're going up, sometimes we're going down. Grief is just a part of life. So help yourself, learn how to cope with it, learn how to work through it, and learn about yourself what you can by observing yourself in your grief. It's fascinating. All right, you take care. I think that's everything. So you have a great week, and take care of yourself, and give yourself some permission to look at and experience your own grief, and take care. Hope you have a great one. Bye-bye. If you enjoyed this episode of the Learn Tarot with Moxxie podcast, please remember to like, subscribe, and comment. It helps other people find us when you guys are vocal about who we are, where we are, and what we offer. Remember too, if you want to submit a question for a tarot reading, you can sign up on the Moxxie website, and there will be a link in the show notes for you below. Those questions are questions that I will consider for using as example readings during podcast episodes. Of course, everything is 100% confidential. There will be no hints or tips about who you are, but it would be a way for you to get a question answered by me and share a learning experience with everyone else. So if you are interested in doing that, in that free reading, please head on over to the Moxxie website where you can sign up. And again, there will be a link in the show notes below. Remember too that the website has a ton of resources and freebies that are available to you that will help you on your tarot learning journey. And lastly, if you want to stay up on the nitty-gritty of what's going on at Moxxie, I invite you to be a free member of the Moxxie community. You just need to pop over there, sign up, I know that we don't always catch every single episode, and signing up will mean that when there is a new course announced, you will hear that. When there is a new blog post that I am particularly pleased with, I will send that as well. You have my word that I am not an over-emailer, because I really do not like over-emailing, and I don't like reading through tons and tons of emails that just seem to be sent for the sake of being sent. So I promise I will not do that to you. So those are some ways to stay connected with Moxxie and ways that I invite you to join the community. All right, you take care, have a wonderful week, be kind, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.